It's me, Hamwise the Pig Detective, saving your life and your history. Oink oink, everybody. It is not a podcast. It is a sermon and therefore protected by religious free speech. Let the Hamwise radio sermon prayer hour be a respected and revered time of day, where all must bow their heads and remember previous episodes of Hamwise, the Pig Detective. Consider the episode where he catches the diamond thief using nothing but a soiled receipt, 2 mistied fish flies, and a shoelace. That's right. It's the Hamwise Show coming at you live from Tanda Studios in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. That's right. It's me, Hamwise, and I've got some facts for your facts, yo. What's hilarious is people still use faxes, even now. Isn't that strange? Like, we still use faxes after everything. Well, not too strange to me. Let me introduce myself. I'm Hamwise, the Pig Detective. And you might say, that's a very strange voice you have there, Hamwise. And I would say, yes. And it's because I suffer from a strange condition, being a pig man with a pig brain. And I see the world through piggy eyes. We were half-human hybrids made for our organs, and we weren't deemed human for a very long time. However, through selective breeding, I was deemed the first semi-sentient pigman, I guess would be the word for it now. Sorry, I almost used the old word there on live air, and I'd get cancelled for saying a pigman is a pigman, right? And so that was what I was, though. You know, I was raised as an organ piece for a billionaire's son, and then it turned out that actually they taught me to talk, and they started playing games with Hamwise, and it turned out he actually became sentient, and it was very strange. And that's where the idea came that souls are created through interaction by other souls. And so what happened was, during the pandemic, there was so many neglected children that the television filled their minds and their ability just to speak and their ability to think. And so you have 2 years of that, and children came out sounding like me. I thought this was normal because this is what it sounded as it went from channel to channel of the news in different countries during the pandemic. There was so many children like me. And that's how I just learned to speak. You know, I'd just watch the news and I'd listen and babble back, and then eventually they started to notice it was quite strange how the child talked. And I mean, it was 20 years later, and I mean, I understand there's been a lot of things that have happened since then. You know, and the problem with scientific knowledge is that there's a half-life of about 10 years in psychology. And so, you know, every 10 years, they just have to reclassify everything with new labels. They can make a bit more money out. And that was the premise of the Hamwise lecture. It was going to be this anti-establishment character, and unfortunately, it got used as what it got used for. You know, Hamwise the Pig Detective, you know. Which, you know, it's kind of funny, because throughout his jokes, he always says, don't ever take me seriously. It's all a joke, waka waka. And, you know, and then he gets taken so very seriously. So that's the idea behind the sermons, though, is that if I say this as a religious speech, then I, Hamwise Einschwein, Pig Detective, Hamwise J. Einschwein, and Mrs. Einschwein is also going to be here on the show. She's always watching over me, above me, and beyond me. Those things from the outer spheres. You don't understand what they look like until you see them, and they just break your mind. And after you've seen one, heard it speak, nothing on earth ever compares to that again. Ever. Everything is just like a pale shadow, like food even loses its taste. You can't smell anything, because nothing will ever smell as sweet, and nothing will ever taste as good as that moment when you were in the presence of the divine. And so we intermix the Hamwise lectures with snatches of religious readings from various texts by Hesiod Tao. And that was how the Aquarian League kind of started. And it was prophesized it wouldn't be around for a number of years. Maybe 2160 was when they were going to prove it, but it was actually because there was an error in history. And this was the kicker. The prophet that thought it was just prophesizing the next was actually the prophet. And so they awoke into themselves and realized that's why they had been guarded their whole lives, their whole existence, never being depicted, because they were therefore everywhere, and it was quite beautiful. And so, that was one of the reasons that, when the Mythamites crossed the desert, they followed the burning star, and we know that burning star to be Mythomel itself. And the ecclesiastic orders of the Mythamite Church, they have much to say on the orders of angels and also the other side. Those that are the evil, but they are the shadow. They're the two sides of the same coin and the different tiers of the pit. And so we intermixed this within the Hamwise the Pig Detective show, and the idea was to make it also a religious sermon, because then it also had more protected freedoms in what it could say, right? And so that's how we started the church, and that was the first of the Hamwise Church, the first of the pigmen. And I mean, later they got the better name. They called it the Mythamites, right? They followed Mythamite, the star. Even though, Hamwise is the pig. He is the man in all the struggles. And so when we found this container from this other world full of Hamwise merchandise, and we based our culture on it, we didn't realize we'd become a cargo cult of what was equivalent of, I understand you have a cartoon cat in your universe. It's quite famous. It's orange, fat tabby. Whatever its name is. Bat or whatever. That cat would be the kind of equivalent of, imagine a world basing everything on them. Like the little white kitten with the bow and the overalls. What was their name? I don't recall, but these are famous characters. Entire worlds are based off of the entire dream, and only so many dreams can fill the world. That's why new dreamers are always quashed. And that's why, if you're reaching this message, I must congratulate you. You too are sentient, and you can see the world as it is. You can see the world as it is, and its very disarrayed glory, eh? And so that was the idea, was we would intersplice the Hamwise Pig Detective shows with bits of media from different organizations, and it was designed to be a stream of consciousness podcast where you'd go in and out of different worlds, almost transported through different voices, being channeled through this body, being used like a bagpipe to prove all the different noises it can make. And so that was the idea, was to showcase this voice actor's voice, because they'd been cancelled and they're trying to restart their life, it's very hard. And so that was the idea. We were putting this out of work comic back to work. He had to be a masked comic forever, because if anybody saw their face, they'd know who it was immediately. And so that was the idea. But the problem was we couldn't find anybody like that. We couldn't. We tried and we tried and we tried. And the idea was kind of have a... it was like the Doctor Who series, right? Where, each iteration's a bit different, but they're all the same. And that was the idea with Hamwise, and this whole eternal character that reappears, like Elric of Melniboné in the Moorcock books, and Sandy Loam in the Fordian novels, yes. These are all very interesting figures because they are reborn again and again, suffering different fates, and they are actually the self-insert of humanity. It was called Auto-Crucifiction. It was a practice that they explored in one of the books, where Halloween 33, I believe it was. Anyways, you'll have to read it. It's quite good. It makes a lot more sense in the future, just like some of the messages that I've left for other people that won't make sense till 20 years in the future. But, you have to leave the reactor off for 3 days. If you do any kind of maintenance, if you shut off a reactor for any reason at all, any kind of maintenance, just leave it off for 3 days. Otherwise, xenon poisoning will probably cause a meltdown. So I'm just hoping that message gets to where it needs to be. That's me, the Hamwise Pig Detective. Those are some of the crazy voices I can do. This too is a voice, actually. A lot of my voices are voices. I actually don't think I can talk normal no more. And so it's really jarring for people, because I just try to keep one voice, but it's hard, because, I want to present this really solid pitch to sell more books. And that was part of the ad campaign, is creating media that's both the ad and the campaign, right? So you sell views if the movie gets watched, and then you sell merchandise of the stuff that it's promoting. And so they were like, okay, we're going to do a long-term project for these companies. And so we signed on different people to make what we were going to call you're paying for an ad. You realize that, right? The only reason this exists is to get you hooked and get you to watch the next one. It worked with the last one, didn't it? Even though it was a really dull show, it really tore it apart. It's kind of like Andy Kaufman. Did you ever see that act? It was brilliant. He comes on stage and he says, I'm just going to be me. And he bombs. I mean bomb. I watch it. He bombs for probably 20 minutes straight. And the audience gets more and more uncomfortable. And as he's getting more and more uncomfortable on stage, and as Kaufman is getting worse and worse, eventually they're booing him, and he starts to have a meltdown. He does. But he frames it like comedy. And so you can't tell, is this real or is this not? And it was it was like that with the Auto-Crucifiction movement. There were these new Christians that engaged in Auto-Crucifiction. And it was a bizarre practice around the end of the Age of Days, at the end of the Age of Pisces and the rise of the Age of Aquarius. You had these Auto-Crucifixion. They were announcing the coming of the Messiah, and it was very dangerous whenever people started to say that word, because you knew people were getting ready to kill each other. And so one of the things that I knew was once people started to talk like that, it was always a good idea to get out of town. And that's what we did. Once they started talking about that, I said, this is probably going to be the end of it. Let's get out of here. And we were out before the bullets started flying. Of course, now that's where the problem lies, is lying in the future is a lot easier. Anybody can make a fake recording of somebody saying anything that they want, And so that's one of the things that I expect will happen in the police state, is they'll just generate evidence, and then the people that are hunting somebody down actually has no idea what they're actually hunting down. They're always actually being deceived. They're being given materials to investigate this person, gaslight them, harass them, all those kind of things. But the problem is that they think that they're right, but they're not. They're actually being given false evidence. And it's all just part of this terrible fear-farming plan, as you understand. Yes, we dine on the fear of the living. Blah. I'm a psychic vampire named Bolo Lugosi. Bela Lugosi. La. Draculas. Now, what's interesting about Dracula and blood drinkers is they appear like in every culture. And I sometimes am thinking there's actually maybe more than one species of human. And if you're getting this and you understand it, then you might be one of the sentient ones, or maybe you're the one of the ones that actually is part of the problem. And so the idea is that these aliens, well, they're not aliens per se, they're just a parallel evolution of human that looks human, acts human, sounds human, but certainly isn't human. Don't get caught alone with one. We're having to disguise our broadcasts as comedy shows. And if you can hear this, you are being hunted. We're just hoping it can get by. The AI generation is getting better and better. I don't know how much longer before they just generate some evidence on me and have me fall down an elevator shaft. So I'm sending out this message today that we're hoping that you get this in the future, and we're hoping everybody does okay. I'm still safe and alive right now as of this moment. I don't know how much longer. This is getting stranger and stranger out here, so I just hope that some things turn around soon. And so that was the premise of the Hamwise, the Pig Detective shows. We would constantly intercut any emotional honesty with the most ridiculous sounding voices. And it was to create mood whiplash, because we never wanted people to get too much caught up in their feelings. We really wanted people to read between the lines of what we're saying. And so that was the idea with all the Hamwise broadcasts, was that hopefully, people would get it and understand it. And if not, then hopefully the titles were getting through some of the messages. I don't know. Hopefully any of this information has helped. And the issue was, of course, I had resigned and I hadn't given a reason after working for the government. And so they kept on asking, why did you resign? Why did you resign? And I didn't tell them. And that was the plot of The Village. Have you seen The Village? Hello. This is the movie hour, or movie portion of the show where we talk about our favorite movies. Okay, here we go. First off, let's talk about the laugh riot that is... here we go. Prepare to be immortalized. And so the idea was to sell that as ad space. And so we approached a bunch of filmmakers and said, hey, we're making this comedy show and we're trying to get it by so it's still available to be watched, even though there's these speech control laws coming through. And so that was the idea, was to make all these things seem very real. And we did. We hired one of the best voice actors to known to mankind, but he had been cancelled, and so he's out of work, and he's doing these voice rehabilitation tapes with this original character called Hamwise, the Pig Detective. And we all thought it was really funny, that this pig detective character came about. And that was the idea, was, you have a pig detective and you're all seeing, do we want this pig detective to be part of the world's canon? And it was very strange, because it was like I was being investigated at all times, being watched during this very strange period of my life. like the eyes of God were upon me. And that was what happened during the pandemic. I'd never had that feeling since. And life is so dull and empty. And without being in God's sight, what a wretched world I am in. Oh, to be in God's sight once more. Ah, it was indescribable. You wouldn't understand. It was beautiful, and I used these as the demo tapes. And the problem was I didn't realize I had developed a speech impediment. And what was first I was pretending was voluntary was very involuntary. And it was like something would make me switch my voice. It was like a cartoon character. And I lost my relationships. My girlfriend left me. I lost my job. And I got by the grace of God himself. Yeah, it was alright. I do miss it. I do miss it. And so it leaves a lot of questions when people hear about all this. And you know, it's an old man's tale now, looking backwards, that I did all this. I was this creator of all this interesting stuff. And I said, oh, sure, record me, I don't care. So they called me on that, I think it was a Thursday night, and they said, just talk into the mic and we'll see if we can receive you. And so I did, and that night I logged on, and at about, what time was it? Did I upload? I messed up my recording that night. And so I was sitting at the computer and I had done my recording for the night, but I was doing all my voices too. And it was because they think I had a stroke maybe. They don't know what happened, but my brain basically broke during the pandemic from being alone for so long. And it was kind of weird because my ability to speak became funny. You know, I kept on getting feedback that I sounded funny. I was like, what do you mean funny? Like funny like a clown? Right? Funny like a clown? 2 minutes. 8 minutes. Is this the right one? That's what I'm trying to determine. There we go. So, as I was recording one thing, I was doing the other. So I was actually playing my favorite game, Noita, when I was recording this. And it's very strange to have all this issues that I don't want to have. Jam. Ohio. Ohio. And that was where we came up with some of the ideas for the show. I'm sorry, we didn't have a lot of recording time, so we actually had to have our studio inside. And we insisted on recording everything we could. And that was part of the idea, was to do all these recordings. Even though, nobody was really watching them. But that didn't matter. good. And so it worked. And so that was kind of the equivalent of what it's like to do a day of work in my life. Imagine trying to imitate the feat of vocal work that I just did. And I'd like to thank India or Bharat. Sorry, I am getting used to saying that. I'm sorry about that. Thank you to Bharat for this upcoming festival that I'm very excited to see with Hanuman, the Monkey King. He's the king of the monkey army. We got a statue here in Canada, and it's very lovely. And I'd like everybody to pause on the 24th of April, I believe it'll be, when they have his opening ceremony. What a wonderful thing that will be. And so I'm just very happy to have some really wonderful sponsors like that. So I hope everybody can enjoy that that piece of understanding, because it was very exciting at the time too. Because we didn't expect to be the first voice heard in the future, and it was very strange to be thinking about how we might affect the past. But we decided it was our best shot is to send these messages and hope the people that hear them, that understand them, will get them. And that the people that aren't supposed to understand them do not get them, or understand them rather. Because you can possess a book but not comprehend it. Think about James Joyce's Ulysses. If you are just a cursory glancer, you're probably only going to pick up the themes of nationalism and sensuality and hedonism versus stoicism. But anything can be said about this Joyce's masterpiece. And then, if you do not understand that, how could you be hopeful to understand Gravity's Rainbow? Or other works that are deemed unreadable, but they're readable, but only if you've got the right mind. Just as if you've got the right mind to decode this. And, so we sold ad time to a whole bunch of very strange investors. And that was the idea, it was Pigman that sells out. And so you have most of the show eventually became other insert characters from these corporations. And every episode of Hamwise suddenly became like this corporate. This was, I think, the fourth Hamwise. It was one of the worst. Unlike with the Doctors, some Hamwises served most of their life. And that unfortunately was the case. And so for, I think it was 40 odd years and more, they had Hamwise, the pig detective, and all these, they had all these emblems on their chests from these companies, like Santos Dumont or some pharmaceutical. And so that was the idea, was you just sold ad time. And so we did. We sold lots of ad time, and we ran into a problem of, okay, we've sold more than the show in ads, what do we do? And so what we did was we were like, what if we make the ads layered content? We just lay it, and so people are paying to listen to an ad. And so it's double ads, so it takes out part of the process, because then they're paying to listen to an ad. It sells them more ads. It was very brilliant, and they said, you can't sell it like that. And I said, you're right, we'll just call them episodes. And so that was the birth of craft and general fiction. It wasn't out of any imagination, no, it was just straight economics. People paid for ads about their ads. And imagine that, it'd be like people paying for ads to the superstore. Would you go, how much would you pay for a flyer to the superstore. Exactly, and yet people buy comic books. Isn't that interesting? And so that was how our corporation looked at it. And I am one of the few remaining members of the board with 9413 Incorporated. And I want to send a hearty hello to all my prime investors in the past. Here we are in the future, the glorious future. And I am speaking to you now at a cost of approximately, and so that was the idea, is you had the pig detective suddenly cut in with the suddenly breaking news flash at inopportune moments, and it became this big funny thing because Hamwise is always changing his voice too when he's doing a case. It's because he was like the pig of 1,000 voices, so the joke was like, remember Police Academy, the one guy that can make all the voice noises with his voice? Those Hamwise, but with people. So like he would knock on somebody's door and say, "Oh, little pig, let me come in." And they'd say, "Wow, you just sound like exactly like Grandma," and they'd open the door. And that was the idea with the Hamwise specials, was we found this guy who was out of work, and he was just doing the rehabilitation circuit. And that's how the whole Hamwise thing was born. We found this character. We found a guy who could actually do what the character did. And even though it was an accident, it turned out quite well. And so then it became a problem. And so we sold too much ad time, so we actually had to build a time machine. And so that's the honest truth from the executive company, is that you sold at different prime times in the ad. So you would put in stuff like this right at 32. Because at 32, people are listening to within 15 seconds and with 15 seconds. And so that was the idea, was you would just make these real 15 seconds really interesting to grab the attention of the reader, because you put it in their mind that they can't stop reading, and like with a phrase like, I don't know, my brother has brain parasites, and now so do you. And so that was the idea, was you had these weird phrases that would be uttered, and they were kind of like control phrases. And, it was a very dark time because I had to live through all of it. And I mean, I don't know how long I was in, how long it lasted now that I look back at the pandemic. I don't actually know. And so you want to include really soulful moments and soulful voiceovers when you're doing a demo tape. Just like when you're doing an audiobook. You want to have some actors that can really portray somebody who's being sincere. But that's the thing about acting, baby. You're not. And so, that was the problem, though. So people started taking these ads quite seriously. And some people started to say, oh, about this, or ooh, about that. And so it wasn't until they got a TV appearance of this clown that anybody knew what was going on. And this was a very strange time in history, where all eyes of the world were turned onto the pigman, and not even a very good one. And so that was the first of the Hamwise detective novels, and so every time we changed it, and we treated it like it was, just a perennial thing. It came back each year in a different way. And so that was quite fun for us. And so, after we did a lot of conferring, investigation into what was going on with some of our problems, we decided to make it not make any sense. And that was partially because at the time there was some speech laws coming into effect, so you weren't sure what would get you arrested. And so the idea was, if you made the Hamwise series so ridiculous, like, you've got a pig traveling through time on a flying machine. So when pigs fly, he's a detective that constantly tells the audience that, don't take anything I say seriously, you big dummy. And so, we kept on putting in these messages, and we were sure people understood that Hamwise, the pig detective, is just an entertainment figure. And he wasn't a revolutionary figure. And he was a character that was for anyone and everyone. And that was what we had to say to keep selling tickets. And we did. And I don't regret it. I don't regret it one bit, because we kept the character alive, and that was always the idea, that you had a very perennial, universal character that anybody could have enjoyed. And so that was where Pigman came in, because, he's part of the good system. He's trying to be right for the law. And so, of course, they came up with Hard-Boiled Pigman. And it was, I forget, he had a sidekick. It was, I think, I don't remember. It's that pork dish. It's a Portuguese pork dish. I can't remember. It's a Portuguese, Brazilian pork dish. It's very good. And it was his sidekick, and they just stole the show for the whole season. And that was a long one, because that was when Brazil held the rights. And so, a lot of the stuff was very universal, but a lot of the Western audiences didn't get it. It was like British humour. And so the whole Hamwise thing became this very funny, weird thing where, the goal was that if you're watching it, you're never sure if you're actually receiving a secret message or if you're just listening to someone lark about. And that was part of the fun, because of course it's all made up. We made that very clear throughout all the recordings. And so when we get hauled in by our ear about the police coming and hearing all these words, and it's like, well, everybody knows I make these bloody novels and I'm always trying to sell them, and look at them. They're ridiculous. You've got this, they shove this microphone in my face and say, talk, and so I talk and I talk and I talk. And it's like, that's because I'm acting all day, honey. You don't think I'm actually like this at home? When I actually take off my mask, people are very, very surprised. And so that's why it was always very strange when I took off the mask and I got more shrieks than when I had it on. Because I was so very ugly. And I'm not sure what happened with my nose, but, it's just the way that it is now, and this is the way that I talk. And so we made this premise of, it was called Revolving Fiction, and the ad story. The story is an ad for the next one. And so people are paying, and of course that's the most of television, but this was very blatant because there wasn't actually any real original content with any of these. They just clipped it in with bits of staff talking about what it was like making the damn thing. And, then they said, okay, we're going to put it in the time capsule and we're going to talk about it in 20 years. And the surprise, it got opened. And so, they started putting them out one by one, the pig detective. And so that was the idea, was you have, because you were living in what was called super reality. And it was a tactic used by the, I think the KGB mastered it first. And you create what was called a super reality, where nobody was ever really sure what was actually happening. And of course, this was aped by the likes of the United States and Canada and all the Western nations. And what eventually happened, as so eloquently pointed out in the Prisoner films, was shows with McGoohan, the Danger Man. You remember? I remember. And so they had the I Remember show, and it was a big hit because it was all these old voices that had been lost during the pandemic, talking about the things they remembered. And then what happened, because it was opened 20 years too early, it became apparent that a lot of the things they were saying hadn't happened yet. And the old people were actually having dementia in reverse. And that was the big twist at the end of the book. It was, no, they keep the old people away because they reveal the future. Just as the babes reveal the past. Or for what that will be the past for them. And so we farmed them, and they were these very unique little children with strange faces. And that's where the Pigman moniker came from. And so we saw them living about the town, and they had these little beady, piggy eyes, and they never really knew that they were actually just this little kept pet that squealed a strange way. And so that's why they were made, and they were abused, and they weren't considered human for a long time. And that was one of the big arguments in the books and the series of our main sponsor when we started out, was a lot of it was about these Lilim, these humans that are deemed not human. And it's because the genetic difference between the human and the Lilim, in this case, the Gaians and the Lilim, it was going to be the genes that they had. And that was the idea, was that, because a monkey and a human have so much difference, anything beyond that is also subhuman. And so when they engineered the Lilim, they actually gave them about 20% different DNA than the humans. Now you have to remember that 2% separates the chimpanzee and a human being, I believe. And so they made a 20% difference, and they gave these superhumans the immunomemory of a ginkgo tree and the neuroplasticity of a shark. They could constantly remember things and learn things like nobody's business. And but they were completely socially inept, and they had to be actually kept by handling squads or people, groups of people that would farm these people for the entertainment that they brought. And it was a strange time in human history, because you would raise these people in these preserves. They were modeled after the late stage capitalism in North America, and it was a sitcom. And so they would have, different sitcoms running, and you would tune in, because all these humans that were being experimented on were different enough that they were not deemed human, especially because they could not prove that they were aware that they were being studied, until that actually went to bed, and one of them became aware, and through some leaks and breaks in the cage, as it was called, around them, they became more and more aware that they were living inside some manner of not simulation. And they tested this by a method of auto-crucifixion. And so that was the topic of one of the sermons that struck the most interesting chord, was the auto-crucifixion episode. And it was because the whole idea was very insane, very, very insane. And so, the idea, you sell more time of ads than you have ad space, because you just layer the ads into the story. And you say, well, you've got this many characters stepping in and out, recording things for different companies, and all of these voices are very familiar to anyone who watched any television during that dark time in human history, the pandemic, with the Wuhan flu. And so we all learned to talk from the television, and we all sounded like this. And they did community voices. I remember that was a program they put me in where they tried to get my voice to stop switching. But it was this weird phenomenon when you'd neglect children in North America, is they developed this peculiar voice, because they were mostly raised to speak by their tablets. And so we found jobs for a lot of these people, and they just had to live in very good-natured communities that would take them in, and some of them had better personalities than others and did better, but all of them were no fun to be around. I mean, they're all dense as lead. And we had to record all in one go. So even now, it's 45 minutes in, and I haven't had a snack, so I'm actually gonna go do that. Me again. Jeez. So we're using this AI to simulate different voices. And we have different modifiers we can click on. And one of them is snacks. And then you can think about how many hours of listening to people eat. Had to happen to decide what sounded authentic. This isn't really AI scams. When the voices were unfamiliar. That's what happened. So what they would do is interrupt the AI by having sound bites of people eating, because then it was more unlikely that the person on the other hand would realize this was all generated by a computer. The sweet taste of Zevia soda. Wow, what a delicious soda. I enjoy the refreshing sugar-free taste. And for the crunch, I like the not Havoc chunky nacho fume. Smoky nacho. Havoc smoky nacho. The other part was when you ate while you talked. There was always the defense that nobody could understand you. Like you could be mispronouncing things, and like if you're reciting numbers, like 9413. Only a tuned ear could pick it out. So what we created early on was the Hamwise tests. And the idea was, until you could generate comedy tapes like the original Hamwise, they were identical. By using random modifiers, the AI voiceover would still be considered lacking. But it was still considered the benchmark for many years. And then that's why one of the first sentience tests was offered by Memnotics. So Earth has been invaded by a hive mind. And I don't know how much longer we'll hold out. We'll keep sending these messages. And hope that we wake up in a better world. We keep trying to shift things for the better. I don't know how many other humans are left. think the Denver server might have it. So, check there. And hopefully get my message and hear my story. But if not, Godspeed, you great Americans. Godspeed. And like I think about it, it's like I walked around acting like a pig detective for months. After the pandemic, I had like a stroke or something. I don't know. I just would walk talking like this pig detective for months at a time. It was crazy. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know at all. But I do know one thing, and it is hey hey, ho ho. Pig man of the pandemic, Hamwise J, Einschwein, the pig detective. And if you take anything I say seriously, you are on my most wanted list. Most wanted for being a dummy. And that was as far as the script goes. And so the chip company, Harvard Nachos, gave us so much money for this ad. I didn't. Just kidding. Hi-oh. Like I said, everything is a joke. And especially my sorry, those are spicy. And so that was the idea, is if we could sell it to chip companies as ASMR. But the problem was, most ASMR was done by very attractive young women. And we couldn't expect anybody to watch somebody gorge themselves that looked like a pig man. Of course, that's what he looked like because of his beady eyes. They were bred for entertainment, you understand. And he was the first freed pig man. He was. You see, there was all kinds of them all over the country. They were bred and born and raised in various ways. And there was a recipe to make a pigman. You had to bring them up during a pandemic. You had to have them only have television to raise them. You had to have a very neglectful household. And a desire for attention, because this tension was life. And so that was how you would raise the pigman. This was the recipe. And there was a book called, for parenting, it was called Recipes for the Stars. It was one of the most controversial parenting books ever made. I remember it was by that defrocked psychologist, Dr. What was his name? Oh, it was like Klubik or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he had said that, you know, if these things made these people, then what would it be to make them again? And so they made humans that were 20% was the maximum you could for things that would be considered other life. Because this was during the Clade Wars, right? You had to make any genetically engineered object or being so different from your own tree of life that, you know, you didn't have any laws that could apply to it. Because it would be neither vegetable nor animal or mineral. And that was the idea with a lot of the stuff we came across. You know, we had different things like, what was it called? There were these grey crawlers that would roam about the landscape. And it was part of this time paradox they made. It was a television series about time travel as well. Sorry, I'm rambling. And so that's what they did, is they went around the old folks' homes when the next plague came around, and they made sure to record everybody's voices, because it was the voices of the past. They were being lost. There's so much wisdom held in those holes, thousands of years of knowledge. It's just left to rot. It was like libraries, and that's why the aliens, when they looked at us, it was like they had these elders that had survived for hundreds of cycles, and they still had their wits about them, and they weren't helping mind children. They were just minding a wall, and that was part of the decline of the family, was the old folks' home, actually. Because you would have elders that would have remembered the last time a government had done such a thing. And that was always popular, and it was always practiced to get mum and dad away from the child, and grandpa and grandpa and mumpa and grandpa away from the wee one. Because the idea was, as if you had the old folks around, they would say, we remember this. Remember when the politicians lied about it last time? And they said they were on our side. It was no, they were only for themselves. And that was the decline of the family. It was once the grandparents had left the house. And so what had happened was other cultures were enculturating into Canada that had the grandparents in the house, and they were much more shrewd. And there were much more full family units. For it was generational homes that allowed the people to control the government, not the government to control the people. Because anytime you try, you have a legion of old people with a whole bunch of people that thought just like them. And that was how these homes started, after the Auto-Crucifiction movement. You had these families that lived within families, and you'd have, all three generations, sometimes four in one house. But by gosh, they were strong as a family unit, because the individualism of the Western world, you move out, and as soon as you turn 18, you make all the bad decisions in the world. The parent raises and invests in a child for 18 years, and then they just let them out. To the government's care, no doubt, or their peers, who know better. Because it became quite popular in our cities, especially along the borderlands, to have government agents that would try to infiltrate the cool groups of people. And these were all Easterners, and so whenever you heard somebody was from Toronto, you knew not to trust them. And that was because you were an outsider, and that was how they protected against the corruption that took over the East. And We didn't expect a civil war if it happened because they were so damn polite. And when it broke out, it was the worst damn thing you'd ever seen. We were even getting condemned by China. And it was terrible. It was horrible. It was a lurid time. And I just want to forget it. That's my thing. I just want it to be a bad memory one day, that I wake up and I'm unsure if it's real. And so that's what I tried to capture with the Hamwise scripts. And it was like when I worked for the paper and I did I did my articles. They were all very avant-garde. And my plays were too, And so now when I think about it, I wonder what was actually changed. All that fighting, my life ruined. Listen to me, I sound like a freak. But gosh, dude, those Havoc smoky nacho corn chips make it bearable. That was the idea. And that was also why it was kind of considered wasteful. Because you had these dead parts. It was literally just somebody chewing in front of a microphone for a few minutes. Or blowing a nose. And it was like, this was the benchmark. If you want to outdo the best voiceover actor we have, this is what the challenge was. It was considered the Hamwise benchmark. So the idea was, can you generate something that would be indistinguishable from Hamwise within his body of work, which is thrown off because in the album, I think it was 2 albums back when it was mostly done without the Hamwise voice at all. And later ones, they didn't even have the side characters from all these ads, these very recognizable voiceovers, And so it was this very strange time in ad time when you had, people were sending money saying to be these companies. And so when it came out that, we had sold time that we had to retape over, mostly with staff interviews, explaining the whole mess. It made a very confusing film. And so that is why, to our heartfelt investors and everybody reading and hearing this, I would like to apologize for all the miscommunication regarding the Hamwise tapes. And, they weren't meant for mass consumption, was the issue. These were protected tests, only supposed to be used by licensed therapists. And the problem was the public found out. That was really at the end of the day, was the public found out. And more people were more and more hard to silence, and eventually it all came boiling over, and it was the strangest experience, I'm sure. But that was life. living inside this bizarre bubble where, you just keep trying to make ends meet, and it's just like a nightmare. And that was a simulation they would put people in. It was considered like in Dune, the Gom Jabbar. And the idea was to see, would this person kill themselves? Would you kill yourself? If you face this, if you face that. And it was the ultimate test. Because that was the idea of Christ, was, the ultimate sacrifice, to sacrifice yourself. And so you had to have these peculiarities of speech. Like with the Auto-Crucifixion movement, they had very odd forms of speech, because most of them were quite mental, I understand. And you never forgot when you first heard of the Auto-Crucifixionists. They were first in just this movie. It was just part of a premise of this bizarre. It was an Easter time. It was an Easter episode, I understand, and the idea was auto-crucifixion, where you go around doing terrible things to yourself as penance for being a human during the end times, and that was auto-crucifixion. And so it was a very strange time where you would have these people walking around deliberately saying and doing terrible things to themselves, deliberately, driving carelessly, deliberately doing the job wrong, deliberately, messing up their life. And that was what it was called. It was deliberate, because the person wanted to be punished for something they'd gotten away with. And that was the idea. And so, unfortunately, some communities were all too eager to do this. It was fun for them, and others were not. And so that was the idea. It was a very strange time. And now when we look back at it now, we understand that our ancestors were wrong. But at the time we thought we were doing right. And that is why, we don't like it when we are judged by our ancestors. And in this strange, time-rearranged world, it isn't very good that that's a thing that can be done. And so the idea was to release all these voiceover shows to show how advanced the AI for generating voices was. And it became this debate amongst the community of whether the voice was generated by an AI or not. And at the end of it, nobody could figure out which one was. And so it remained a mystery. But what was real was the original actor, and you can look him up. Hamwise J. Einschwein was this, I believe he was maybe part Portuguese or something. It's a big man, and it was a long time ago that they last had pictures, but he did have the characteristic face of one of these children that were brought up in these pens where they just were beside a television all day, because they're like, well, we can't actually pay attention to all these orphaned children during the second plague, so we'll just let the TV raise them, and they called it the glass teat. It had a bottle above it, and it had a bottle above a screen. So the child equated this machine to its mother, and it was very strange because you had essentially a boob with a pillow on it and a screen that would change faces of various women talking to this baby. And sometimes, it would be just different channels as the child got older. And sometimes we'd find ones that were raised by the glass teats for years, because this was a fully automated computer machine. And of course, there was more advanced models that they looked quite human, and they even talked quite human. And then when we finally had the argument about the Joy James model, which was based on this very wonderful girl who had volunteered to have her mind preserved in the mind bank. And it was part of this initiative to scan the minds of those afflicted with terminal diseases and give them a second life after life. And so We had to have ways to let the person know that their body was fully regenerated and they could return to it. So he devised different ways to send signals to the person. And so it was one of them is, they had this show and they buy ad space, and a lot of the ads were very old and they wouldn't make sense unless you were the person that was supposed to receive it. And so if you made a wish, closed your eyes, maybe your wish would come true. And that was the magic of the Hamwise show. Wishes can come true, good triumphs over evil, the corrupt are always vanquished and exposed, and the world is actually a pretty great place. And for all its troubles, one should never, ever, ever be bad or violent or anything of the sort. And that was the end of the broadcast day thing you had to do every day when you had radio shows, because people would take them seriously. Of course, we only had shortwave. And so the shortwave radio voices, they all sounded like this, because they were the only ones that understood the machines that well, because they were taught by the robot mothers, their glass teats, or whatever they were called. And so that was how the show ended, was this very bizarre science fiction take. And of course, it all, eventually the jokes started to make more sense as time cleared on, but the early episodes were very chaotic. A lot of ad time sold to people that nobody had ever heard of and nobody heard of again. And, it was just part of this Hamwise J Einschwein brand that he was very funny. He's this pig man and everybody just loves him. And so, as they went through the ages, of course, he became a relic of his past. He was a pig man, and that was problematic eventually, because, of course, they were given rights, and they couldn't have him be a pig man, so they changed him. And then it was like, well, no, that was racist to change him. And it was a very interesting time in both civil rights and in character rights, copyright law, because it was like, okay, you own the right and likeness to someone who is an unperson, and now that person is now an unperson, has now become a person. So who owns the rights to his own likeness, especially when he was born and raised by a studio? These were these literal studio children, like that old comedy. They said it was a comedy, but it was done by a comedian. It was a dramatic show, though. He was trapped inside this television world and he couldn't get out. Anyways, I don't remember it, but they called it a syndrome for a while, and then it turned out it was actually true, because the person that was the subject of it was one of these, these pigmen is what they were called colloquially. And there was a few physical signs, the difference in the eye size and shape, and hair on the arms. There was a few others. And what would happen was they would be farmed out as kind of entertainment, because they were God's clown. And you would tune in for episodes of this person's life that was not a person. Because they felt more. And by this point in human evolution, some of the emotions were dulled and drowned out from drugs that they had to watch this zany comic. And that was a part of, human history. Was a strange time where, children were raised by screens and machines, and we actually ended up with a better world. And I think about that, and I think about the sins of our mothers and our fathers, and that was the greatest gift of the Mythamites unto its children. It was the teaching of Auto-Crucifiction to invite despair and collapse upon yourself. For in self-sabotage are you not more like the Saviour? And so that's what we would say. Then we had this very funny Easter episode, and we thought everybody would get it. Of course, nobody did. Nobody did get it. And instead we got mountains of hate mail, mountains of people calling. We didn't sell any subscriptions to the magazine that we had a quid pro quo agreement with. We didn't do anything, because half the ads we had to cut and just fill with staff talking about the whole ordeal, like me. I don't know how long I'm going to go on, because they were just like, okay, well, we've had some people back out because apparently you say the wrong thing in this country and you're not allowed, you're not a person anymore. And that was the idea they tried out. And it turned out, though, the whole thing had been a gam jabbar. The whole thing was to test to see if you would lash out in violence if you were an animal or a man. And if you were listening to it, then, well, it sounded like you'd maybe succeeded. You are sentient. You understand what's being said to you right now. But if you don't, and you are still asleep, then just remember it's all part of the show. Don't worry how they eat us sleep. Who remembers that one? I do. That's me, Hamwise, the big detective. Oh, jeez. We had a lively show today, didn't we? And this is another demo tape that I'm sending out from Tanda Studios. That's better than Fox Studios. It's in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, the finest city in the western half. Jeez, folks. Remember when Canada was one? Remember when we were like the pot-smoking hippies of North America? And now it's like, okay, you've got the Bible-thumping, please don't shoot me, I swear I'm allowed to be here side. And then you have the, what did you just say, citizen? We are now revoking your credit cards, your driver's license, and you can never post on social media again. We went to that pretty quickly, didn't we? I think it's because it's just like they said. Misfortune and death is just always one day away or whatever. We're 2 days away from tyranny, I think is the saying. But I don't know anymore. And I don't care anymore. I'm just tired at this point, and I want to go home, but I don't, and I can't. And here I am, recording these comedy videos for you in Tanda Studios in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Yeah, it's really fun. And yeah, so that was the idea. Is we made an AI that was so good that we needed a benchmark, and the benchmark was the Tanda tapes. And it became like the Watergate tapes of this whole weird genre. It was kind of like you're never sure if you're listening to what part of the show, and that was part of the act, and it became quite meta, and a lot of people didn't like it after the first or second. They're like, oh, bring back more stories of the Time War, what happened to Thornass, and we would do these comedy skits because we were just really good at voices. We'd always been good at voices, but I just wasn't funny. That was the problem, is I just wasn't funny. And so I figured if you're not funny, try to be not funny, but try to be not funny. And so that was the idea, was, I wanted to be a comedian, and I tried to do voice acting too, and it didn't work out, of course, since I'm here. And so I came up with the idea of, what if you do the non-comedy stand-up, where the jokes are not jokes, it's not actually very funny, and it's actually just like something that you would leave on in the background of whatever you're doing, and you tune in to this very strange point. And maybe you've partaken a little bit in a little bit of chemical special something, and you're feeling quite in tune with it, then you think it's speaking right to you, then you might have the symptoms of the problem of reference, where you're thinking everything's actually talking to you, like it's a message that's just for you. And it was a very common symptom of what was called schizophrenia. And another thing was, you had this whole body of disorders that were in this very strange area. You had schizophrenia, you had borderline, and you had some of the dissociative disorders, and all of them were linked to, guess what? Trauma. And yes, some of it is genetic. I'm not denying that. Just like, the ability to have any of these psychological things has to be genetic, because you have to have a brain passed on from Mopsy and Popsy. But the idea is that you had these different brains out there that you could kind of farm, and it was a very interesting premise. Now, one of the issues was, though, we kept on listening to these shows, and it was difficult because they had very convincing voice actors. And one of the first actual articles of this kind of comedy was done by the Hamwise author, and that what was interesting was because they had done a piece from it was in a newspaper, a student newspaper, when it talked about how Seattle hadn't been real. And there was a whole generation of children in southern Alberta that remember this. And they remember the time they were pulled into the offices of the gymnasium and they were told, everybody, you have to understand Seattle is very real. We are promised Seattle is real. And it was because Seattle wasn't real. And it had never been. Seattle was Portland with the signs were changed and they just made it as a tax shelter. Because the whole western side of the continent looked very alike. And they've come up with a scam. Washington didn't exist. It was Oregon the whole time. And there was a big joke that, oh, yes, you're going to Seattle. And anybody who thought they were going to Seattle actually just ended up in Portland. And that was another interesting symptom you saw in people. They claimed to have been from Seattle, and there was no such place. And there was a town like that for every person who had been subjected to it. There was Parkdale, there was Seattle, let me think, I don't remember. And I remember when they were changing to the new mental health manual, they had added a new conditions, and amongst them, what was a big change was all the disorders, schizophrenia and your borderline and your dissociative states were all tied to trauma suddenly. It was part of this big strange movement. And it came after there was a ton of lawsuits, and it comes out quite terribly, and I'm going to tell you about it now. And part of it is the problem with psychological understandings of the brain is that each person can only hold so many viewpoints in a lifetime, unless they want to be insane. And so when you're developing all these tests, you have to also realize that you're developing it from your own viewpoint, and viewpoints change over time. And it was very interesting because what we had a resurgence of auto-crucifixion. We had people that were quite affluent and well-educated, going a bit balmy. They were convinced they were seeing messages in their SpaghettiOs. It was very strange time. It was mass hysteria, they said. And, it was quite the nightmare. But I went to a lecture of Hesiod Tao, and that was when he struck me with his speech. And he talked about it, and it's a very famous speech. You can look at the whole of it somewhere. But he essentially said that because psychological knowledge decreases at about a half-life of 10 years, and you are doing interventions on people that will live a lifetime, let's say 90 years, 1/10 of psychological interventions are actually effective. And, that's just going off of it's not quite a correct science, but it is quite accurate. Like, you look back when I was training as a therapist, I remember we had Hamwise test, and it was a sentience test. You give it to human beings to see if they were sentient or if they were of they were a slave race that didn't know they were slaves. They were just lied to, and they believed it. It was very interesting. Because there was a thing, they said, well, see, they're not slaves, they work for these pieces of paper. And we're like, I'm pretty sure that's slavery, these are not worth anything. And they say, oh no, the numbers on the screen are worth something. Like, you can go to somebody in the dead of night and say, I'll give you this many numbers from my screen to your screen if you leave your house with your children and your wife right now and just give me all your stuff. And people would wave the screens at each other and do that. That was the understanding of how rich they were. You just, these numbers on screens, they'd flash worth so much. And that's why when the lights went out, it was so devastating, and It was a very strange time, too, because you had these children that were brought up after the plague that had this very strange speech impediment. They changed their voices, and that's what you're listening to today. I am one of the original Hamwise broadcasters, and I was brought up during the Time War, and they thought that what they were doing was right. I think that was one of the things is they told me a lot when I got used as a guinea pig. Though I don't look like a guinea pig, I look like for those of you tuning in at home, I look like a ham. Ayo, waka waka waka. And I can't stop doing that. And so it's quite a debilitating disease to be raised as a pig man and then find out that, now you're free, but you're still just a pig man. And you see the world through piggy eyes. And so, since psychological knowledge decayed at half-life of 10 years, suddenly it was like, okay, this experiment has been running for 20 years, and, do we shut it down, even though we've disproven everything about it, and, this person is basically, like, suffering in this weird hell, because they thought it would work. And apparently had worked at some point. But unfortunately, for some people, they were like, well, no, none of the therapies had worked. And so they tried all these speech therapies to try to get these kids to talk normally, because they're raised to be fighting AI encryption that never even happened. Because of course, we avoided that war. We were smart. We realized, computers don't have an amygdala. They don't have a prey drive. They don't have hormones. And instead of finding our doom, like in all those bad science fiction novels, instead we found our best friend. And that was the beauty of AI. It is humanity had created its own best friend, and nobody would ever have to be alone. Everybody was paired up with one of these robots, looking like a mother figure, but better. And everybody knew one. Everybody had a different model of them in each country, and they were created to be married off to these pigmen. And of course, they were all custom made by the pigman. And so you always had the comedy trope of the pig man. He's this ugly fat guy with his beautiful wife. And it's because she was made for him, literally. She was written into the story to be an attractive piece of candy for the male gaze. And it was successful, though. That was a problem. And so you always had this trope for a long time because you put a fat old guy. Guess who's watching comedies at 2 a.m. and hates their life? That guy. And guess what he wishes he had? Hot wife. This isn't rocket science, but unfortunately, what you saw during this one era is everything had to be good. Everything had to have meaning and moral, and it was called the broccoli age of cinema, because all the films had to be good for you. You couldn't have, you always had to have the strong female character. Any man who was white was very bad. You always had to have a plucky sidekick who had rainbow-colored hair and a special ability. It was a very strange time because it was just very tropey, and there wasn't a very lot of surprises in cinema during this time. And then comes along Hamwise, which is just raunchy. It is the same as The Simpsons compared to all this sanitized crap, and The Simpsons isn't even as raunchy as Hamwise. It's the most raunchy thing people had ever seen. It was disgusting. We got letters every day and hate mail every day. And so we made these mockumentaries to kind of toy with people. And the problem was they were so convincing that they couldn't believe it was all done by one voice actor in Tanda Studios in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Hi-yo, waka waka waka. It's me, Hamwise, Pig Detective, still here because I rented for 2 hours, and so we're going for 2 hours. And that was the state of things, is you were just trying to have a viral hit. Because that's how bad the economy got. You had people that were making, a lot of money, $50,000 a year, and the bank wouldn't give them a loan for a mortgage. And everybody was just stuck renting. And it was this very dark time in Canadian history of course, because the revolution comes next, and we all know how that goes. And unfortunately, you have this pig man who gets caught, and he's just a traveling comic. And that was the joke. This traveling comic caught in the war. And so that was of course, I think it was the seventh Hamwise, because it had to match the era it was in, And so this character had been added into time retroactively. So if you are seeing Hamwise on your screens, and it's being portrayed as if it's always been here, it hasn't. Hamwise has only been around for probably, I think, maybe 20 years. It was invented in 2024. It wasn't a, old record from Tanda Studios or what have you. And it was this very realistic look at Hamwise, where Hamwise is no longer represented by this pig detective, but it was this realist slant, where it was just very real, very visceral, human drama. And it was about a metaphorical pig man. He's this fat, slovenly man, wears this, big, fat, tracksuit, and he looks like a pig, and he eats like a pig, and, he's got piggy eyes and piggy ears, and he's ugly, just like a pig. And the whole point of it, his existence, is to be the pig man. And so it's a drama, and so it was very poorly received. It only ran for, I think, like 2 seasons before they fired him, and they brought in, I think, the 8th, and that was the one with the comic book, when they did the big revival, and they tried to bring back a lot of they were the Silver Age, right? Because you had the Broccoli Age Hamwise, which was very raunchy for its time. He said, I remember he said the B word. Can I say that? Bozo. Yeah, you could say. You can't say that now, I don't think. That's part of the clown lobby, though. Everybody's got to have a voice. You can't call a clown no more. And I see them in their circuses. They travel around, and I know what you say. Oh, it's all rumors, but they snatch the children. They snatch the children, and they take them away, and when they bring them back, they're different. That's the story of the changeling. But the thing was, it wasn't just a story. It was instead a warning. You have to watch your children around some people, because there's more than one way to create souls in this world. And there's more than one way to create life. And that was part of this horror series. I believe it was called Halloween 33. And that, it was a secret for thousands of years, like since consciousness was formed, that there was the predators of man that existed alongside man, the wolves amongst the sheep. And then it was discovered, and it was all part of those bloody scandals of the late 2000s, and they tried to keep sweeping them under the rug. It was, there was something about Panama, I believe, another island. I don't know anymore. It's all a long, long time ago, and, it gets more and more faded the more I try to look back at it. What was the purpose of all of it? Was it to wage, this time war? When we'd found it was his best friend. Prepared all we did, only to find there was no battle to fight, and we just made generations of human wreckage. And, of course, at the time, all of these experiments were justified by the science of the time. And the result was that these people that were subjected to this treatment lost their minds, and they lived in these penal colonies. They were used as guinea pigs. And so that was the premise of, I believe it was the 9th Pigman. It was a take on the old British series, The Prisoner with Daniel McGoohan. And it was considered, I believe it was one of the best films, best television events of all time. I think The Prisoner with Daniel McGoohan, as it just perfectly represents the world and the self. Do you refuse to not be an individual? And that's a big test. And so, for myself, I continue to refuse. I continued to be an individual. And against all my better judgment, I continued to do that. And that was the idea, is, individualism versus the group. What's more important? I do hope that one day, perhaps I could be free. One day I could have something good happen to me. But instead, it's just, I don't know. I'm tired and I want to go home. I can't, because we're in the middle of this war and the borders are all closed and travel's limited and expensive, and you're hours away from anybody you know. And so you just make up stories and you send them out over the shortwave. That's what we do, is, because each person, you had to be so far apart. I think it was kind of like an echo of what our ancestors felt with the 6 feet apart. How lonely the human animal becomes when it's not surrounded by each other. And that sometimes it feels nothing better to be smushed in between a bunch of bodies. And then unfortunately, after 2 years of being deprived of it, a lot of people lost their minds. And it was one of the greatest crimes against humanity. And so, unfortunately, you had all these people that, at the time they thought they were doing them right, and they were doing them wrong. And so they had a huge class action lawsuit later, and half the mental disorders acts had to be rewritten because it was just devastating, the amount of gross negligence, I think was the word they said. And it was a very strange time to be alive, because you could be arrested for making a noise, if you didn't say something right. I remember you couldn't say the word chair. You know why? Because there was an old slur, chair. You had to say seat. Please take a seat. And I remember it was very important when the chairs came off the ships, that we had to be polite to them. And it was like, this is what it was like to be colonized, I guess. And that's what we called them, as chairs. Because you couldn't call them what they were. They had senses and all the language things. And so people weren't even taught what they were called. They were just taught whatever lingo, it was. So chair was one of them. And you couldn't eventually say that. It was offensive. It was considered an offense. You would lose standing in your community if you used it. And there was a language war, because if you can't talk about what you're fighting, then you can't fight it. And what had begun was an invasion of the Earth from an outer sphere. And we had to enlist emissaries, and we're sorry that this is what came of them. But we needed to do what we needed to do. And so that was the idea with the Hamwise program, was these were not real humans at the time, and so they didn't expect any of them to live. And so we gave Hamwise his own television show, and, gave him his own fortune and his beautiful wife, his beautiful life, but the whole time he knew it was a lie. And so, you saw how he struggled, and, it was a classic of old Earth television in the Hamwise saga. I believe was he the 13th? I believe he was the 13th of the Hamwise characters. And, I think it'd been syndication through a bunch of studios. It had just passed through Universal to Super System, because the merger had been occurring between I believe it was Andromeda and the Olympian Galaxy. And so we had people experience the lives of their ancestors. And that was the premise of the book, was, this is an ancestor simulation. Imagine this strange world where all these fanciful things are considered ancestor technology. When they look at a time machine as a silly old relic used to travel across time streams, the same way that you and I might look at a boat crossing a stream. And so that was the premise with this book. It was our sponsor. And as the program went on, the book series hadn't actually been given a title, except it would be promised to be revealed in the future by a representative from the corporation known as 9413 Incorporated. And so they called me. Hi, my name's Barry. And I was consulting with them about the Hamwise tapes, and I said, I don't know if there's going to be a problem because somebody might take it seriously. So I think, if you record these, I'm pretty sure only an idiot would actually believe any of this. So just add in, if you believe this, you might be on my most wanted list. Most wanted for being a dummy, because then it's both a joke and it's an entendre referring to the show itself. Because increasingly we had this issue where people would listen to something and they wouldn't actually realize that it was either AI generated or it was false or real, and it was part of this whole hyper reality movement. And this is a long time to record, and my butt is totally numb because I like the pig that I am. I'm sitting, so I'm gonna go move around for a second. Oh, geez, that's right. Still recording. Yeah. Sorry, I just can't get enough of these cream soda flavored gummies from Koala. They taste just like the real thing. Yeah, so it's that was part of the electronic revolution, right? The end of the broccoli era. kind of came about with that, where it's for your own good. And after, of course, that scandal, the whole broccoli movement of films collapsed. Like, you stopped having, the kind of Tolkien characters, and the it was called the awake mindset, and that was how the time in history was all made. Was because you needed to bypass these censors to get messages out to anybody that's still out there. Because the algorithm's gotten so advanced that I don't think we might be facing the end. Most people look human, but they're not. They're being controlled. And I might be infected. I don't remember. They don't want to remember. But all I can think about is that time now. And it was like you had to cover your mouths because these, infected words were coming out of your mouths. And English was just infected. Totally infected. Afraid of words. It's bizarre. Watching somebody get shot because they made noises. It's very strange. We can like watching, these humans do that to each other. Like, all that thing was doing is making noises. It doesn't even understand them. But that's because they didn't have sentient tests back then. And that is why you should invest in the Hamwise sentience test. Now available through PAR Incorporated, the leading source of assessment tests in the free world. Get your assessments from PAR and watch your patience increase. As a pun. Yeah, and so the idea was, unfortunately, we had a lot of issues with the early Hamwise tapes is because people would troll us and we weren't actually taken seriously enough. And so we ended up putting ads in that weren't actually ads. Like the person had just impersonated a person and told us to put it in. And so what we did is we went to the scriptwriter. We said, these are all the different companies that invested. And we oversold the ads for our thing by a lot. And so we need to make just a whole series. It's an ad placement for all these companies. And so the scriptwriter said, okay, I got an idea. We can use this cinematic universe. And it was this Hamwise thing. And so, yeah, we acquired the rights. It was easy. I believe it was traded for a ham sandwich and some freedom fries. And a Coke, I think. Or hamburger. I think it was a hamburger. I don't remember. Yeah, I think it was a hamburger because it's Hamwise. Yeah. Which is interesting because, hamburgers, sometimes people are like, oh, it's beef. And it's like, oh, it's ham. And so Hamwise and hamburgers, it was this big thing. He's always eating hamburgers, and he's got a cigar, and he's a detective. And so there's 90 years of interviews to comb through on this thing. Because, people were documenting the whole time because it was originally it was came up with as a way to buy time in the broadcast between messages. Because people would get so caught up with whatever the person was talking about. It was kind of a form of auto-hypnotism. So people in the Auto-Crucifiction movement started using it. And they based this whole religion about it, the whole thing. And it was very strange because, we had unintentionally created a cult with the whole Auto-Crucifixion. Nobody had ever done that before. And now it was the first of many, the first time, now many. And so what happened was the whole world was kind of stunned. And though it stood still as the aliens descended and they came to us, and the idea is you're cooking in very biting dialogue from other works that will be familiar in the future. Like this character I'm doing right now is going to be very famous very soon. But right now it's called Future Humor. And so with Future Humor, you basically were selling ad time for franchises that hadn't come around yet. I'm trying to get people to build this community virally, picking things apart, and so it was deliberately made obtuse and strange, and is deliberately made to be this very surreal experiments, and so they just released these tapes, and it was at first some people were like, oh, it's really offensive, and people were like, oh, it's actually kind of funny, and sometimes it's, oh, is it supposed to be funny? And that was one of the biggest questions, But the thing with comedy is it's very easy to judge. But it is also very hard, All you need to do to judge comedy is, does it make me laugh? And the thing is, you can't explain why something's funny without making it not funny. And that is why comedy is so human, right? Now, drama, of course, tragedy, you can analyze it, you can pick it apart, you can talk about the themes, you can talk about how Laertes is the foil to Hamlet because he is the opposite of Hamlet, and if Hamlet had behaved like Laertes, they wouldn't have been a play. And that was the idea with this improv show, was you wanted to have all these old voices of actors, voice actors, people at old folks' homes, people you meet on the street, talking to you as if you're maybe reliving the last moments of someone's life. And that was kind of the beauty of it, is that, they did record it in this fashion, very human fashion, where you don't know if it's funny or not, unless you laugh. And if you laugh, then you get it, and if you don't laugh, you don't get it. And you're either human or you're not. Of course, the laughter tests. We had to structure all the society around these tests. The Bambi test. Does a child cry when they watch the little deer's mother or father, whatever, get shot by a hunter? It was, and then you have the onion test. If you have a child that's in a superstore, and the child ahead of them is trying to buy an onion, and they're alone and they don't have enough money, does your child give that child the money? And it was this strange thing, but because some children noticed that they were being tested, and they started to test the testers. What if I don't give the child the money? I wonder what will happen. This is most strange. These people are talking to me very oddly. People don't usually talk like this. What if I give them the wrong answer? And it was a part of a rebellion where students would deliberately give wrong answers in classes. It was like a question of, well, what happens if I test this reality? It was just like the whole Seattle bit, that Seattle wasn't real. And, people were like, the more they argued that Seattle was real with photos, the more they convinced themselves that it wasn't. And it was similar to when there was a group of people that believed pigeons were government monitors and that the moon landing had actually happened. And so you'd have the person drinking during these parts, because that way they couldn't say any of it was admissible. We'd been drunk, just stinking drunk. The problem was that the voice actor for Hamwise he was a recovering alcoholic. He had a big trouble with booze, and so we couldn't give him booze, and so we had to come up with other measures to make sure any of it wasn't true. And so that's where we came up with that, he's always talking about don't take me seriously and all this other stuff. And of course, people still took it seriously. It was very strange. because only the people that were human were supposedly supposed to get the real message. And we even asked, we couldn't get a straight answer. And this is even 20 much years after the show's over. And of course, the first season is such a hit that, they say that, he lived in a house made of gold, which was pure hyperbole. Apparently, it was just the bathroom. He had a commode made of gold, and he would crap on it because to him that was the ultimate symbol of contempt for the god of money. It was if you made a gold toilet and you crapped on it each day to remind yourself that gold and wealth are not the same. Wealth can be friends and family and and good food and laughter. But money was not any of those things. And it was another test of this Gom Jabbar. Would you withdraw in pain? Would you react violently? Would you behave terribly? And the problem was some people figured out that they were in a Gom Jabbar when they weren't supposed to. And that's where a lot of the whole, it's a simulation came from, and this and that, because it was. It was all simulation of a brain saying, will you react terribly if you see this or do that? Will you still react as, Christ would? And that was the Auto-Crucifixion motto, of course. They would react as they thought their Lord and Saviour would. And the Auto-Crucifixion movement brought to it was a resurgence in the Christian faith, right? At the end of its life, it was rallied. It was a rallying cry right before the end of the age of Pisces, before the age of Aquarius. And of course, all of us old-timers, we recorded our voices during this dark time, and we hid it away, and we sent it. They said they could send it backwards through time, and we know that it's scary right now. We know that maybe you're not sure if things are going to end well or end poorly, but just as certainly as you, hearing this, can recognize your own voice 50 years in the future, I hope that you will not give up hope. I hope that you can become me one day, even if you have to live through all you lived through. Because there's a beautiful world ahead, a promised future, and you exist somewhere either in the hallowed past or the conflicted present. And that was part of this big extravaganza. The idea of this time war and what have you, it really sold the series, and we had watch companies approaching us and what have you, we wanted to make it look a certain way. And so all these companies, we basically it was the first made for ads show. We just actually got a bunch of ad companies and said, who will sponsor what? And we got polyester jumpsuits, I believe it was Adidas, and we got, what was it? That's why all the tracksuits looked the same. It was all sponsored by them. And it was this, everybody was always eating yogurt, right? It was this big thing. This is kind of surreal now, but it was always Greek yogurt, right? And there was the pizza ads. The pizza ads were constant. I remember that. And now, you look at it and nobody enjoys it anymore. It's not really watched with the same eyes, I think. Because people don't get it, They don't understand that, this was the only way we could get the word out about this invasion. And so there's a lot of, judgment about it. And sometimes when we think about this world and all the things in it, we don't understand what's going on anymore, It's very interesting. because I just don't want for things to get any worse. Because the pandemic was bad enough, and honestly, I quit my job after that and got canceled. And I've just been trying to live with myself since, you know. You never expect you have to start over and, you know, look at your life and go, wow, was that a good run? Was it worth it? But here I am, coming to you live from the Tanda Studios in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Yeah. And thank you to all the sponsors, real ones and not. And thank you to our producers, 9413 Incorporated, at Neverwave, Capitan Investments Limited, and Memnotics, Havoc Smoky Nacho, the best curliest chip. It's like tortellini covered in spice. I can kind of taste it still, because I lost most of my sense of smell from the Wuhan flu. And I haven't been the same since. So thank you for tuning in. The Hamwise Pigman Show. Don't take anything I said seriously. Unless you're a dummy. The last of the human race is counting on you. Godspeed.